Thank you. You may be seated. I want to share a little insight with you this morning. Something you might not be aware of. There are times that it is quite easy to become discouraged in the Lord's work. And that is especially true with what we have been going through during the past 12 months. 12 months ago, 1 year ago today, was the last time that we actually worshiped and had church services, worship services, in the manner in which we had always been accustomed to. 1 year ago today, we had the last Sunday evening service we've had in a year. And then for 2 months, we met in small groups with multiple services on the Lord's Day. And then we've been socially distanced, so we haven't hugged each other. It's just been a really strange year. And during these times that we've been going through, and times often that we have in the Lord's work, there are times you want to smile and you have to sigh. There are times that things just seem to be pressing in on you. But in those times, when you want to smile and you have to sigh, and when cares are pressing you down, that is when this book, the Bible, is a source of comfort to me. And it's a source of comfort to every Christian. Because on the pages of this book, we can discover men and women of God throughout all the ages who have been discouraged. We can find men and women venturing on a service for God, confronted with the same problems you and I face. People being forced to deal with some of the issues that constantly even annoy us. In the passage that is our text this morning, we see God's man Nehemiah, a man unmistakably called of God, securing an army. He has helpers, and he's going about the work of rebuilding the walls of the city of Jerusalem. Yet, Nehemiah finds himself faced with discouragement of every possible kind. In the beginning, it seems that everything is going wonderfully well for Nehemiah. Artaxerxes, the king, was more than happy to equip him for his journey, and Artaxerxes was happy to send him to Jerusalem. And Nehemiah gets there and he prayerfully surveys the situation. He looks at the ruins, and he soon has around him a great army of people ready to shoulder the responsibility and the burden of rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. And yet, as it happens so often, immediately following a time of blessing, the enemy counterattacks. There was the opposition of Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem, who launched a campaign of hate against Nehemiah. And this opposition was faced realistically because God's people had a mind to work. They had a heart to pray, and they had an eye to watch. And so, at least for the time being, the enemy was held at bay. But here we find something much more serious. You see, in every Christian advance with God, we find there are two different kinds of foes that arise. One is external, and the other is internal. If you would turn with me to Nehemiah chapter 4, I'm going to begin reading in verse 6. So built we the wall, and all the wall was joined together unto the half thereof. for the people had a mind to work. But it came to pass that when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabians and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard the walls of Jerusalem were made up and that the breaches began to be stopped, that they were very wroth. And they conspired, all of them together, to come and fight against Jerusalem and to hinder it. Nevertheless, we made our prayer unto God and set a watch against them day and night because of them. And Judah said, the strength of the bearers of burdens is decayed, and there is much rubbish, so that we are not able to build the wall. You see, what you find in that passage is internal trouble striking at Nehemiah. Judah says, there is decaying strength. Judah said there's accumulating rubbish. Judah says it is an impossible task. Here we are, right in the middle of this great project of rebuilding the walls of the city of Jerusalem, a work for God. And someone comes in with a report and says, it can't be done. It's not going to happen. We're tired. We're worn out. The job's too big for us. Don't you know it was a wonderful comfort to Nehemiah to hear those words? But did you notice who said it? It was Judah, of all people. Of him, long ago, it was said that his foot should be on the neck of his enemies. Here is the cream of the army. Here is Judah, the crack regiment, threatening to revolt. Here is Judah, filled with discouragement. Nehemiah had expected trouble from Sanballat and Tobiah and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites. That was to be expected. He had no doubt expected some trouble from some of the nominal adherents, those that just kind of hung around because other people were. Those who joined the project because everyone else did. But Judah? Can you imagine? Can you imagine how downhearted Nehemiah was? Can you imagine the sickening sense of letdown that overwhelmed Nehemiah when this happened? For him, it would have been so easy to just simply give in. It would have been so easy to just go back to Persia, go back to the palace of Artaxerxes and be the cupbearer again to the king. But you know what? I find no indication in the Word of God that Nehemiah ever contemplated going back to Persia. Because Nehemiah was a man on a mission for God. He was sure of himself in the sense that he was sure that the blessings of God were on the work he was there to accomplish. Nehemiah knew that even if he had to stand alone, retreat and surrender, giving up and quitting, were not an option for Nehemiah. Beloved, this weapon of discouragement is a powerful weapon that the devil thrusts into our souls. Let me ask you a question. Do you ever get discouraged? Of course you do. But discouragement is a disease. Discouragement is a bad disease. And discouragement is universal. It is recurring. It is contagious. But it is curable. And make no mistake about it, write this down. The devil is the sinister minister of discouragement. God's people say, let us rise up and build, and the devil said, let us rise up and stomp them into the ground. When God's people have a mind to work, the devil has a mind to wreck and destroy. One of the best ways the devil has to keep you from being what you ought to be. And one of the best things the devil has to keep this church from being what it ought to be and being what it could be is discouragement. Let me say this. All discouragement is either of Satan or of self. Did you hear that? All discouragement is of Satan or of self. It is never of God. God is called the God of all comfort. And that word comfort means cancellation of discouragement or encouragement. The God of heaven has cornered the market on encouragement. And the devil that works against God works with discouragement. There's an old story. One of those stories you learn in Preaching 101 about the second week. It's a story about the devil having a big auction and auctioning off all of his tools. But there was one tool the devil had that was clearly marked not for sale. He was auctioning off fear, and he was auctioning off hatred, and he was selling pride and envy and lust. And yet there was a strange looking tool over there, well worn and not for sale. And asked about it, the devil said, I can't afford to sell that tool. He said, that's my most valuable tool. That's discouragement. He said, when I pry someone's heart open with discouragement, then I can do almost anything I want to do. Discouragement has always been one of the devil's most valuable tools. Why does it happen to us? Why do we get discouraged? Sometimes, often in fact, we get discouraged for the same reason that these folks did in our text. We're worn out. It was a function of fatigue. Look again at verse 10. The strength of the bearers of burdens is decayed. They were tired. They were weary. Their strength was failing. They were weary of carrying a load. Now, we might as well admit we're human. And as humans, we're going to get tired. You remember our Lord was human as well as divine. And Jesus once got so tired that he sat on a well curb while the disciples went into the city to get food. There was another time Jesus was so tired and so weary he went to sleep on a cushion in the back of a ship in the middle of a raging storm. No matter who you are, you can get tired. Write it down. It's a fact. Now, when does discouragement come? Look again at verse 6 in our text. The wall was joined together under the half thereof. They were at the halfway point. The job was halfway completed. The end was in sight. The goal was out there. That's when we tend to get discouraged. That's when our strength seems to wear out. The new wears off. The shine is gone, the luster's gone, the new's gone, and we get discouraged. Go buy a new car. You go buy a new car and you open that door and, oh my goodness, that new car smell is just wonderful in it. And with today's terms, you financed it for 72 months. After about 3 years, when that car is about half paid for, you begin to wonder why you bought it and if you should have ever bought the thing in the first place and saddled yourself with all those payments. Discouragement. It comes when we're tired. It comes when we feel weighted down. The strength of the bearers of burdens is decayed. They're worn out. And there is much rubbish. To rebuild those walls of Jerusalem, they had to use the old stones that the first walls were made out of. But they had to dig through the rubbish and the rubble and the trash to get those stones. And they had to remove the rubbish so they could rebuild. And digging through all the rubbish, they were worn out and they were weighted down. Now let's look at this from a practical point of view, and let's be honest. Digging through the rubbish and rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem, it was not a glamorous task. There's nothing glamorous about digging through rubbish looking for stones. Right now, in your own life, you may be facing a situation that seems too big to handle. And your problem isn't fatigue, it's frustration. And you're not just worn down, you're worn out, you're weighted down, and it seems like you'll just never get it done. That's what's happening to God's people in our text. They were not only worn out, that's fatigue. And not only were they weighted down, that's frustration. But they were also wrought up. Look at verse 11. And our adversary said, They shall not know, neither see, till we come in the midst among them and slay them and cause the work to cease. Now here's the contemporary English version of that. Our enemies were saying, before those Jews know what has happened, we're going to sneak up and kill them and put an end to their work. You see, there was actual physical danger involved in this work of rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. They were worn out, weighted down, and wrought up. They were emotionally disturbed. So you've got the problem of fear. They were afraid. Folks, the devil is very clever. And he knows when you're worn out. And he knows when you're weighted down. And that's when he comes to get you all wrought up and all bent out of shape. And when fatigue, frustration, and fear all get together, you know what happens? You get discouraged. And they were also written off. And that's failure. Look at what verse 12 has to say. And it came to pass that when the Jews which dwelt by them came, they said unto us 10 times, From all places whence you shall return unto us, they will be upon you. Now that kind of hard to figure a little bit. But here's what the NIV reads. Then the Jews that lived near them came and told us 10 times over, wherever you turn, they will attack us. You know, it's bad enough when your enemies say it can't be done. But when your friends say it can't be done, when your friends say it's time to quit and give up, that's the coup de grace. 10 times the Jews, their fellows, those supposed to be on their side, those supposed to be working with them, said, you can't do it. Over and over they said, Nehemiah, you're a failure. Over and over they said, Nehemiah, you can't get it done. But what's the cure? What's the cure for discouragement? Well, there's a physical cure, and that is you renew your strength. Look at verses 21 and 22. So we labored in the work, and half of them held the spears from the rising of the morning till the stars appeared. Likewise, at the same time said I unto the people, let every one with his servant lodge within Jerusalem, that in the night there may be a guard to us and labor on the day. There it is. Go lie down and get some rest. You need to change your diet. When you get worn out physically, and when fatigue comes, you can get discouraged. Are you listening? Never make a major decision when you're fatigued. When you're depressed, don't do it. But there's more than a physical cure. There's also a spiritual cure. There's a spiritual cure for discouragement. And that spiritual cure is that we need to revive our spirit. I want you to look at a very obscure little phrase in verse 14. Remember the Lord. That, folks, is one of the great verses in the Bible. I looked and rose up and said unto the nobles and the rulers and the rest of the people, be not you afraid of them. Remember the Lord, which is great and terrible. Be not afraid of them. Remember the Lord, which is great and terrible. The word terrible in that passage means terrifying to your enemies. The Bible tells us about David in 1 Samuel 30 and verse 6. What did David do? David encouraged himself in the Lord. You get discouraged? Encourage yourself in the Lord. You're discouraged, you're downhearted. Think about what God has done for you. Count your blessings. Like the song says, name them one by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord has done. Psychologists tell us that gratitude is one of the healthiest emotions that we can have. Because it's almost impossible to be grateful and discouraged at the same time. Remember the Lord. What Nehemiah said, remember the Lord. And think not only of His goodness in the past. Don't just think about His closeness in the present, but think of the faithfulness of the Lord for the future. What did Jesus say as He gave that great commission? He said, I am with you always, even to the end of the world. Robert Louis Stevenson. There were some passengers on a ship. It looked as if the ship was going to go down. It was a tumultuous storm, and the passengers were below deck, and they were whispering to one another, wondering, will the ship sink? Will we go down? Are we safe? And one of the passengers said, I'm going to find out. And he made his way across the heaving decks, and he made his way up to the pilot house of the ship. And the pilot of the ship was there with his hands on the wheel, and he just looked at the man. And when the pilot looked at the man, he knew he was afraid. The pilot looked at him and smiled. The man didn't say a word. He went back below deck and he said, we're going to be all right. How do you know? He said, I saw the face of the pilot. And he smiled at me. Hebrews chapter 11, the Hebrew writer has their faith's hall of fame. By faith, Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than did Cain. By faith, Noah being warned of God of things not seen as yet. By faith, Moses, when he came to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. And there's Enoch and Abraham and Jephthah and Rahab and all of those people in God's hall of fame of faith. And as the Hebrew writer transitions into verse 12, he's just finished calling the roll for this faith's hall of fame. And he says, see, we are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses. Let us run with patience the race that is set before us. Listen to it. Looking to Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. Just like that man on that storm-tossed ship looked into the face of the pilot and he smiled at him and he said, we're going to be all right. On the storm-tossed seas of the discouragement of life, we look to the face of our pilot, Jesus Christ, and he smiles at us. And Jesus says, it's going to be all right. But if Jesus is going to smile at us, and if he's going to be the author and finisher of our faith, he's got to be the Lord and Master of our life, not just part of our life. Because if Jesus is not Lord and Master of all of our life, he's not Lord and Master at all in our life. And I don't know what might be going on with you, but if there are changes that you need to make, if you need to do something different for Jesus to be the Lord and Master of all of your life, this is your opportunity to come and let whatever needs to be done make known to us as together we stand.